The first 911 call came in at 3:17 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. A resident on the 8th floor of a residential tower reported hearing what sounded like gunshots from an apartment down the hall. The caller was uncertain about the exact location, but believed the sounds came from the direction of units 814 through 818. She had locked herself in her bathroom and was whispering into the phone because she was afraid of being heard. The building was a 14-story residential tower in a densely populated urban neighborhood. It housed approximately 2,000 residents across 196 units. The structure was built in the 1970s with concrete construction that made sound travel unpredictably between floors and units. What sounded like nearby gunfire might have come from several floors away, or it might have been from the adjacent apartment. Patrol units were dispatched at 3:19 p.m. with instructions to approach cautiously and gather information before taking action. The building had controlled access through a main lobby entrance staffed by a doorman during business hours. Emergency exits were located on each floor leading to stairwells that descended to ground level. The first officers arrived at 3:24 p.m. and made contact with building management. The doorman reported no unusual activity in the lobby. No sounds of disturbance had been audible from the ground floor. Surveillance cameras in the lobby and main corridors showed normal Saturday afternoon activity with residents coming and going for weekend errands and activities. Officers proceeded to the 8th floor using the main elevator. When the doors opened on the 8th floor corridor, they immediately smelled something chemical. Not the typical apartment building smells of cooking or cleaning products. Something sharper, acrid, like burning plastic or chemical accelerant. The corridor was empty. Apartment doors were closed. No visible signs of disturbance. The officers moved cautiously down the hallway toward units 814 through 818. As they approached, they heard voices from inside one of the apartments. Multiple people speaking loudly in a language the officers didn't immediately recognize. Then a sound that was unmistakably a weapon being manipulated. The distinctive metallic snap of a magazine being loaded into a firearm. The officers backed away from the doors and called for backup. The situation had just escalated from a possible noise complaint to a confirmed armed presence. Additional units were dispatched along with a supervisor to assess whether SWAT should be activated. At 3:41 p.m., a second 911 call came in. This one was from a resident in apartment 816. The caller was a woman who reported that armed men had forced their way into her apartment approximately 30 minutes earlier. She was hiding in a bedroom closet with her phone muted. She could hear the men in other rooms. She believed there were at least 4 or 5 of them. They were speaking in a language she didn't understand, and they appeared to be barricading the apartment door and windows. The situation was now a confirmed armed home invasion with hostages. SWAT was activated at 3:44 p.m. The building was placed on tactical alert with instructions that no residents should attempt to leave their apartments until given clearance by law enforcement. As tactical teams staged and prepared for response, additional information emerged from building management. Units 814, 816, and 818 were all on the same side of the corridor. Unit 816 was occupied by a family of 3. Unit 814 was occupied by an elderly couple. Unit 818 was occupied by 2 roommates in their 20s. The units between these and across the corridor housed additional residents whose exact numbers weren't immediately known, but based on lease agreements totaled approximately 34 people on the 8th floor alone. The SWAT commander arrived on scene at 4:03 p.m. and established a command post in the building's community room on the ground floor. Intelligence was limited. Armed subjects in at least one apartment, possibly multiple apartments. Unknown number of hostages. Unknown motivation for the incident. And a residential building full of civilians who were now trapped in their homes because allowing them to evacuate through corridors could expose them to armed subjects or trigger a violent response. Thermal imaging was deployed from outside the building. The 8th floor windows showed heat signatures consistent with multiple people in units 814, 816, and 818. But the concrete construction and interior walls limited the clarity of the readings. Operators couldn't distinguish between hostages and armed subjects or determine exact positions within the apartments. At 4:17 p.m., the incident escalated again. Smoke began filtering into the 8th floor corridor. Not thick smoke indicating a structural fire, but chemical smoke like what might come from burning materials in a confined space. The smoke was coming from Unit 816, the same apartment where the woman had called from her closet. Fire department was notified but held at a staging area 2 blocks from the building. Sending firefighters into an active armed situation wasn't viable. If the smoke indicated an actual fire, residents on the 8th floor and potentially adjacent floors would need evacuation. But evacuating through corridors where armed subjects were barricaded would expose civilians to lethal threat. Building management was able to access fire safety systems remotely. Sensors on the 8th floor showed elevated smoke levels but no indication of temperatures consistent with active flame. The smoke appeared to be coming from intentional burning of materials rather than accidental fire. The armed subjects were creating a smoke screen, possibly to interfere with visibility or to escalate the crisis. At 4:29 p.m., a third 911 call came from apartment 8-T. An elderly man reported that armed men had broken through his door and forced him and his wife into their bedroom. He estimated 4 men with rifles. They had told him in broken English to stay quiet and not attempt to use his phone. He was calling from a phone he kept in his bedside table that the men apparently hadn't found. His voice was shaking. He said his wife had a medical condition and needed her medication, which was in the kitchen. The men had refused to allow either of them to leave the bedroom. The tactical picture was becoming clearer and more complex simultaneously. Armed subjects had taken control of at least 3 apartments on the 8th floor. They were holding multiple hostages. They were creating smoke conditions that could force evacuation. And they were barricaded in a position that made direct assault extremely dangerous for both tactical teams and civilians. The SWAT commander made the decision to begin evacuating the building except for the 8th floor. Residents on floors 1 through 7 and 9 through 14 would be moved out systematically through emergency stairwells that didn't access the 8th floor. The evacuation would reduce the number of people at risk if the situation escalated to fire, structural damage, or armed confrontation. The evacuation began at 4:41 p.m. Building management used the intercom system to announce that residents should prepare to leave their apartments when instructed by officers who would be going door to door. Residents were told to bring identification and any critical medications but to leave everything else behind. The evacuation would be orderly and controlled. Tactical teams positioned on floors 7 and 9 maintained security on the stairwells to ensure armed subjects couldn't use the evacuation as an opportunity to escape or take additional hostages. Officers went door to door on each floor, directing residents to the nearest emergency exit and ensuring no one was left behind. The process was slow. 2,000 people living in a single building meant hundreds of families, elderly residents who needed assistance, parents with young children, and individuals with mobility challenges. Each floor took approximately 15 minutes to fully evacuate. The operation was projected to take over 2 hours to complete. While evacuation proceeded on other floors, the situation on the 8th floor remained static. Smoke continued filtering into the corridor but hadn't increased to levels indicating active fire. No additional communication came from the armed subjects. The hostages in apartments 814 and 816 remained in contact with 911 dispatchers via their concealed phones, providing periodic updates that confirmed they were alive but increasingly frightened. At 5:12 p.m., negotiators established contact with the armed subjects. Phone calls to the apartments went unanswered, but a negotiator using a megaphone from the floor below was able to get a response. A male voice responded in accented English demanding that police withdraw from the building. The voice claimed that they had explosives and would detonate them if entry was attempted. The voice also stated they had hostages in multiple apartments and any assault would result in civilian deaths. The mention of explosives changed the tactical assessment. If the subjects genuinely had explosive devices, a forced entry could trigger detonation that would kill hostages, destroy portions of the building, and endanger tactical operators. If they were bluffing, treating the threat as real would give them negotiating leverage and control over the timeline. Bomb technicians were brought to the staging area and briefed on the situation. Without direct observation of the apartment's interiors, confirming or disproving the explosive threat was impossible. The tactical plan had to assume the worst-case scenario: armed subjects with hostages in barricaded apartments that might contain explosive devices in a residential building still occupied by dozens of civilians on the same floor. At 5:34 p.m., evacuation of floors 1 through 7 and 9 through 14 was complete. Approximately 1,960 residents had been moved out of the building and relocated to a community center 3 blocks away where victim advocates and Red Cross workers were providing support. That left approximately 40 people still in the building. The armed subjects and hostages in units 814, 816, and 818. And the residents in other 8th-floor apartments who couldn't be evacuated through corridors without exposing them to the barricaded units. The SWAT commander faced a tactical dilemma. 34 civilians remained on the 8th floor outside the 3 apartments controlled by armed subjects. Those civilians were trapped in their homes. If they attempted to evacuate through the corridor, they would have to pass the barricaded apartments where armed subjects might shoot them. If they remained in their apartments, they were vulnerable to fire, explosives, or armed subjects expanding their control to additional units. The solution required using the building's fire escape system. Each apartment had a window that accessed an exterior fire escape ladder system. The ladders connected vertically between floors and descended to ground level. Residents could potentially exit through their windows, climb down 1 floor to the 7th floor level, and then be brought inside through a window on that floor where tactical teams could secure them. The challenge was executing this evacuation without alerting the armed subjects that people were moving outside the building. If the subjects realized evacuation was happening, they might react violently toward their hostages or attempt to prevent the evacuation by firing at people on the fire escapes. At 5:47 p.m., the exterior window evacuation began. Tactical operators accessed 7th floor apartments and positioned at windows that aligned with 8th floor units. Residents on the 8th floor were contacted by phone and given instructions to open their windows quietly, access the fire escape, and climb down 1 floor where officers would bring them inside. The first family began their descent at 5:52 p.m. Parents with 2 young children moving slowly down the metal ladder, while tactical operators watched from below. The process was terrifying for the civilians, but successful. They reached the 7th floor window and were pulled inside by waiting officers. The exterior evacuation continued apartment by apartment. Each family or individual required several minutes to make the descent. Some residents were elderly or had mobility limitations that made the climb extremely difficult. Officers positioned on the fire escape levels assisted where possible, but the narrow ladder system limited how many people could move simultaneously. By 6:23 p.m., 28 of the 34 trapped residents had been successfully evacuated via fire escape. 6 remained in apartments that were too close to the barricaded units to risk exterior movement. Those 6 people were instructed to shelter in place in interior rooms away from windows and doors. Tactical operators maintained phone contact with them and were prepared to attempt interior corridor rescue if the situation. Meanwhile, negotiators continued attempting dialogue with the armed subjects. The demands remained vague. Withdraw police presence. Provide transportation away from the building. No specific requests for money, political statements, or other objectives. The lack of clear demands suggested the subjects might not have planned beyond taking control of the apartments, or they were stalling while preparing for an. At 6:41 p.m., the smoke in the corridor increased significantly. Not gradually, but suddenly. Thick chemical smoke began pouring from Unit 816. The smoke spread rapidly through the 8th floor hallway, reducing visibility to near zero and triggering smoke alarms throughout the building. Building systems automatically activated emergency ventilation, but the smoke volume overwhelmed the capacity. The 8th floor became engulfed in thick, choking smoke within minutes. The 6 residents still sheltering in place reported smoke entering their apartments through gaps around doors. They were struggling to breathe. Evacuation via interior corridor was now the only option, despite the risk. Tactical teams donned respiratory equipment and prepared for emergency extraction. The plan was to move rapidly through the smoke-filled corridor, breach the doors to apartments housing the 6 trapped residents, extract them, and move to the emergency stairwell before the armed subjects could respond effectively through the smoke. At 6:49 p.m., 3 tactical operators entered the 8th floor corridor through the emergency stairwell. Visibility was effectively 0. They moved by feel and memorized layout, reaching the first apartment containing trapped residents. Door breach. Rapid entry. 2 elderly residents located and moved toward the stairwell. The operation took 90 seconds. The second apartment housed a single young woman who had been terrified to move. Operators located her, confirmed identity, and escorted her through the smoke to the stairwell. Extraction time, 75 seconds. The third apartment was directly adjacent to Unit 818, one of the barricaded locations. This extraction was the highest risk. As operators breached the door and entered to retrieve a family of 3 trapped inside, gunfire erupted from Unit 818. Multiple shots fired into the corridor through the smoke. Operators couldn't see the source. They retrieved the family, moved them rapidly to the stairwell, and withdrew as additional shots were fired blindly into the hallway. All 6 trapped residents were successfully evacuated. No casualties. But the situation had escalated to active shooting. The armed subjects were now firing weapons, even if only blindly into smoke. The threat level had increased exponentially. At 7:04 p.m., the 8th floor was fully evacuated except for the armed subjects and hostages in Units 814, 816, and 818. The building was otherwise empty. 2,000 residents relocated off-site. 34 people extracted from the danger floor. Only the hostages remained at risk. Negotiators made another attempt at communication. The response this time was different. The same male voice, but more frantic. He stated that the smoke was unintentional. They had been trying to create a smokescreen but had lost control of the burning materials. The fire was spreading inside Unit 816. They couldn't control it. And the hostages were in danger. The tactical assessment changed immediately. If fire was spreading inside one of the apartments, it would eventually breach into the corridor and other units. The building's concrete construction would contain it temporarily, but fire in a residential tower could become catastrophic. The armed subjects were now facing the same threat as their hostages. At 7:16 p.m., the male voice called out that they were releasing the hostages. The door to Unit 816 opened and 5 people stumbled into the smoke-filled corridor. The woman who had made the original 911 call from her closet, 2 other adults, and 2 children. They were coughing violently and disoriented but mobile. Tactical operators entered the corridor, located the hostages through the smoke, and extracted them to the stairwell. Medical teams waiting below provided immediate treatment for smoke inhalation. All 5 would survive without serious injury. The door to Unit 814 opened next. The elderly couple emerged, moving slowly. The man was supporting his wife, who appeared to be having difficulty walking. Operators extracted them quickly. Both required oxygen and medical. Unit 818 remained barricaded. No one emerged. Negotiators called out asking for response. No answer. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures, still present in the unit, but movement had stopped. Either the occupants were incapacitated by smoke, or at 7:29 p.m., fire department reported visible flames in 8th floor windows. The fire had breached from Unit 816 into the corridor and was spreading. If it reached Unit 818, anyone inside would be killed by smoke or flame within minutes. Tactical entry was now a rescue operation against a time constraint measured in seconds, not minutes. At 7:32 p.m., entry teams breached Unit 818. The door was heavily barricaded from inside, requiring explosive breach charges. The blast cleared the barricade and operators flooded into the apartment. Smoke was thick, but not yet flame. Heat was increasing rapidly. Visibility was minimal. Operators located 4 individuals in the main living area. 2 were armed, but not actively resisting. Both appeared disoriented by smoke and heat. They were secured and moved toward the door. 2 others were unconscious or nearly unconscious from smoke inhalation. Operators carried them out. The entire extraction from breach to removal took 38 seconds. All 4 individuals were brought down to ground level where medical teams immediately began treatment. 2 were arrested after being medically cleared. 2 required hospitalization for severe smoke inhalation. All 4 survived. All 4 faced multiple felony charges including kidnapping, armed assault, arson, and terroristic threats. The fire was brought under control by 8:17 p.m. Units 814, 816, and 818 were destroyed. Smoke and water damage extended to adjacent apartments and corridors, but the fire didn't spread beyond the 8th floor. The building's concrete construction had contained the damage. No loss of life. No serious injuries beyond smoke inhalation. The investigation into the incident revealed that the 4 armed subjects were part of a criminal organization involved in robbery and extortion. They had targeted the building believing a high-value asset was located in one of the 8th floor apartments. When they didn't find what they were looking for, they barricaded themselves hoping to negotiate escape. The fire was accidental, started by burning materials they were using to create a smoke screen. The smoke got out of control when wind from an open window fed oxygen to the flames. The hostages recovered physically from the ordeal. Psychological trauma was significant but manageable with appropriate support. The family from Unit 816 relocated to a different building. The elderly couple from Unit 814 moved to a retirement facility where they felt safer. The roommates from Unit 818 found different housing arrangements. The building underwent extensive repairs to the 8th floor. Damaged units were rebuilt. Smoke remediation was completed throughout the affected area. The building reopened to residents 6 weeks after the incident. Security was enhanced with improved access controls and additional surveillance cameras. For the SWAT operators, the incident remained a case study in evacuation logistics under tactical threat. The successful extraction of 2,000 residents from 13 floors while maintaining security. The exterior fire escape evacuation of 28 trapped civilians. The emergency corridor extraction of 6 residents through zero visibility smoke while under fire, and the final breach and rescue of hostages seconds before fire consumed their location. The operation lasted from 3:17 p.m. when the first call came in until 8:17 p.m. when the fire was extinguished. 5 hours, 2,000 people evacuated, 34 trapped residents extracted, 7 hostages rescued, 4 armed subjects apprehended, 0 fatalities, 0 serious injuries among civilians. The timing was critical throughout. The initial evacuation of 13 floors had to be completed before the situation on the 8th floor forced emergency action. The exterior fire escape operation had to extract as many people as possible before conditions made corridor entry necessary. The final breach had to occur before fire consumed the remaining hostages. If any phase had been delayed or accelerated incorrectly, the outcome could have been catastrophic. A rushed evacuation might have caused panic and stampede injuries. Delayed exterior extraction might have left more people trapped when shooting started. Early breach of Unit 818 might have triggered immediate execution of hostages or detonation of claimed explosives. The operation succeeded through methodical execution of each phase while maintaining flexibility to adapt as circumstances changed. When smoke forced emergency corridor extraction, teams pivoted from cautious standoff to aggressive rescue. When hostages were released, operators immediately moved to extract them despite ongoing fire threat. When final breach became necessary to prevent imminent death by fire, the decision was made and executed without hesitation. For the residents who lived through 5 hours of lockdown, evacuation, and uncertainty, the experience was traumatic. Many chose not to return to the building even after repairs were complete. The knowledge that armed individuals had taken control of multiple apartments and held neighbors hostage created lasting anxiety. The sound of smoke alarms or the smell of smoke triggered panic responses for months afterward. Victim services provided counseling and support. Community meetings were held to allow residents to process the experience collectively. Building management implemented changes to security protocols to prevent similar incidents. But the fundamental reality remained. Residential buildings are inherently vulnerable to armed intrusion, and residents' sense of safety had been permanently altered. The 4 arrested subjects faced federal and state charges. Evidence included testimony from hostages, tactical operators, building surveillance footage, and physical evidence from the damaged apartments. 2 accepted plea agreements. 2 proceeded to trial. All 4 were convicted. Sentences ranged from 15 to 35 years depending on individual roles and criminal histories. The incident remains one of the largest single-building evacuations in the city's history. 2,000 residents relocated safely in under 3 hours. 34 people extracted from a floor under armed control. 7 hostages rescued. All accomplished without loss of life or serious injury despite active armed resistance, fire, and extreme time pressure. The building still stands. The 8th floor is fully repaired and occupied. The residents are different people now. The community has moved forward. But the 5 hours when a residential tower became a tactical battleground, an evacuation site, and a rescue scene remain part of the building's history and part of the training reference library for SWAT teams who study what worked and what could have gone wrong.